All right, let's dive into this. Ted Bundy, right? A name that sends shivers down your spine. We're going to try to figure out what made this guy tick. We've got a true crime podcast and a YouTube documentary, so we're going to look at both. Get ready, because this one is dark.
Ted Bundy, a name that sends shivers down the spine. Known as one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, Bundy's story is both horrifying and fascinating. Born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, Bundy appeared charming and intelligent, traits that masked his monstrous nature. He used his good looks and charisma to lure his victims, often pretending to be injured or in need of help. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy embarked on a murderous spree across 7 states, claiming the lives of at least 30 young women. His modus operandi included bludgeoning, strangling, and sometimes necrophilia. The brutality of his crimes was staggering, leaving communities in terror and law enforcement scrambling. Bundy's behavior was marked by a chilling duality. By day, he was a law student and a volunteer for a crisis hotline. By night, he was a predator, hunting his next victim. This dual nature made him all the more terrifying. His arrest in 1975 didn't put an end to his reign of terror. Bundy managed to escape custody twice, continuing his killing spree. It wasn't until his final capture in 1978 that the nightmare began to end. In court, Bundy acted as his own defense attorney, showcasing his narcissism and arrogance. Despite his efforts, he was convicted and sentenced to death. He met his end in the electric chair on January 24, 1989. Ted Bundy remains a dark enigma, a case study in the depths of human depravity. His story is a chilling reminder that monsters sometimes wear the mask of normalcy.
You know, it's interesting. He really messed with people's ideas of what a serial killer is, you know?
Yeah.
Charming, handsome, intelligent. Makes you wonder, like, how well can you ever really know someone?
Yeah, it's like you think you got it figured out, and then bam. The podcast we're looking at starts with his early life, and it turns out there were some red flags there, like cruelty to animals.
Yeah, and that ties into this thing called the McDonald Triad. It links animal cruelty, fire setting, and bedwetting in childhood to violent behavior later. Now, it's not like a sure thing, but it makes you wonder, right? How much can you actually tell about someone's future based on what they did as a kid?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, if anyone had noticed these signs early on, could they have changed, how things turned out for him?
Tough to say. But it definitely highlights how important it is to be aware of those warning signs, The thing is, Bundy created this whole facade of being totally normal. He was into politics, even volunteered on a suicide prevention hotline.
Wait, are you serious? He was saving lives. It just blows my mind how someone could be so messed up but still do good things. It's like he was living 2 totally separate lives.
Exactly. That duality is what made him so dangerous. And it's actually a big part of what makes a high-functioning sociopath, well, so dangerous. They're able to, mimic empathy, be super charming so they blend in, but underneath, they've got these dark intentions.
Chilling. It's scary how easily we can be tricked by appearances, right? The podcast talks about how Bundy often preyed on young women, and he would pretend to have an injury to get them to help him. Can you imagine?
Yeah, it was all calculated. He weaponized his charm, turning something as simple as asking for directions into this opportunity to trap someone. And it wasn't just his looks or how he talked. He even used his car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle, to abduct victims.
It's like he twisted ordinary things into, tools of terror. The documentary shows how he would drive his victims to remote locations, just horrifying to think about.
It really makes you realize how vulnerable we all are, when we're interacting with strangers. Danger can hide anywhere. And what's really disturbing is that he didn't target just anyone. He went after women who were attractive, smart, successful. Why do you think that was?
That's a good question. Maybe he saw them as a challenge or even a threat. The documentary mentions he might have resented women who had achieved what he hadn't, despite his charm and success on the surface.
Definitely makes you think about what was going on in his head. And then you've got this whole other layer, hybristophilia.
Yeah.
Those people who are attracted to criminals. It's a dark side of human nature for sure.
I know, it's so bizarre. Bundy got tons of letters from women who were totally obsessed with him, even after everyone knew what he did. Why would anyone be drawn to someone like that?
Well, there are a lot of theories about it. Some say it's about seeking excitement or danger. Others think it might be a need for power or like a messed up kind of empathy. It's definitely a topic we could dig into more, right?
For sure. But we should probably talk about how cunning Bundy was. I mean, his escapes from custody are like something out of a movie.
Oh, totally. Like that first time jumping out of a courthouse library window while he was representing himself in court. So audacious.
And then he carves a hole in his cell ceiling. It's insane. It's almost like he was toying with the authorities, but it wasn't a game. His escapes made everyone terrified, and eventually it led to the Chi Omega murders in Florida.
That's where things take a really dark turn for
Yeah.
sure. The brutality of those murders shocked the nation. It wasn't just the fact that he killed 2 women. It was the level of violence he inflicted. It was clear he was escalating.
It's tough to even think about. The podcast describes how he broke into the sorority house late at night and attacked 4 women. 2 of them died. You can just feel the horror in their voices.
And you know what? During the investigation, there was this seemingly small detail that ended up being crucial to catching Bundy. A bite mark.
Ah, that's right. Sheriff Ken Katsaris, he put it all together. He realized the bite mark on one of the victims could be the key to nailing Bundy.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
Bite mark analysis was pretty new back then. It shows how forward-thinking Katsaris was.
The documentary goes into it how Katsaris got a search warrant for Bundy's mouth, which was unheard of. They made a dental mold of his teeth using a special brace. It's totally a crime drama moment.
And that little detail, it became the undeniable proof that Bundy was behind the Chi Omega murders.
Amazing how something so small could be so huge. But even after they had him, Bundy wasn't finished. His trial was a media circus, unlike anything anyone had ever seen.
Oh yeah, it was one of the first trials to be televised nationally. Everyone was glued to their screens. It's like the courtroom became a stage, and Bundy was the star.
Yeah. But behind the media frenzy, you have to remember the victims and their families. They were finally getting justice after all the terror Bundy caused. But even with a conviction, his story was far from over.
Oh, absolutely. His time on death row was full of legal maneuvering and shocking confessions. It leaves you wondering just how many lives this supposedly charming man had actually taken.
And that's actually a perfect place to stop for now. We'll pick up the story in part 2 of this deep dive into the life and crimes of Ted Bundy. We'll explore his final years, those confessions, and the legacy he left behind. Make sure to come back because we're just getting started with this chilling tale. It's crazy to think if they hadn't gotten away, who knows how many more victims there would have been.
A question we all need to grapple with.
The documentary talks about how Bundy hinted at a possible motive for his crimes.
He was a master manipulator to the very end.
It's a tough call, no doubt. And it brings up the whole question of how we deal with people who've done such awful things.
Exactly. It was a total game changer.
It's crazy how they turned his execution into this huge spectacle.
You know, even on death row, Bundy was still pulling the strings. He spent years appealing his sentence, trying to outsmart the system.
It's almost like he couldn't let go of control, even facing, the end. The podcast talks about how he'd dangle information about his crimes, but always in this really calculated way, like a little bit here, a little bit there, but never the whole story.
It's textbook narcissism.
Yeah.
Control, even if it's over information, is power for these types. Remember, this is the guy who would go back to where he left his victims, almost like he was reliving it all. The documentary mentions how he would even dress the bodies up, take pictures. It's so creepy.
So messed up. But even Bundy, for all his manipulation, he wasn't perfect, right? He made mistakes, and those mistakes are what helped catch him. Like that time he got pulled over in Utah with burglary tools in his car, that was a big one.
Yeah, that raised a ton of red flags. And then there were the 2 women who managed to escape from him. Their stories are terrifying, but they were so incredibly strong and smart to get away.
It's crazy to think if they hadn't gotten away, who knows how many more victims there would have been. But their bravery, it helped establish a pattern, It gave investigators a better understanding of how Bundy operated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bundy's case also really exposed how much law enforcement needed to improve, especially back then. The fact that he could move around from state to state for so long, it's mind-boggling.
Shows how much they needed better communication between agencies.
Right. And this was way before national databases and all the advanced profiling they do now. Bundy's case was like a wake-up call for everyone.
That's where the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit comes in, right? The podcast really highlights how Bundy's case led to the creation of the BAU.
Exactly. It was a total game changer. The BAU uses psychology, crime scene analysis, data, all of it, to try and figure out these guys and predict what they'll do next.
Yeah.
It's been hugely successful in stopping other predators.
It's crazy to think something so awful could lead to something so good, you know?
The weird silver lining for sure. But we can't forget about the victims. The impact Bundy had on them, their families, it's heartbreaking.
Podcast actually interviews some of the survivors, and it's amazing how resilient they are. It gives you hope, you know, even after going through something so horrible.
Really shows the strength of the human spirit. And it reminds us how important it is to support victims, give them the resources they need to heal and rebuild their lives.
I totally agree. The documentary talks about how Bundy hinted at a possible motive for his crimes, something about his childhood, his relationship with his mother, you know, the whole mommy issues thing.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The documentary delves into how he found out he was illegitimate, which made him feel rejected, abandoned. It makes you wonder how much those early experiences shaped him.
It's hard to say, right? We know childhood trauma can have huge effects on people, but it's not like everyone who goes through something like that becomes a serial killer.
It's not a simple equation. But in Bundy's case, it seems like those early issues, plus his sociopathic tendencies, it was like a recipe for disaster.
A recipe for disaster, that's a good way to put it. But let's get back to Bundy's last days on death row. The podcast describes how he played these mind games with law enforcement, offering little glimpses into his thinking, but never revealing his true motives.
He was a master manipulator to the very end. It makes you think about the ethics of, engaging with a serial killer like that. Are you getting valuable insights, or are you just feeding their ego, letting them manipulate even from death row?
It's a tough call, no doubt. And it brings up the whole question of how we deal with people who've done such awful things. How do we balance our interest in true crime with respecting the victims and not, glorifying the killer?
Question we all need to grapple with. But for now, let's shift focus and talk about the media frenzy surrounding Bundy's execution.
Oh man, that was wild. It's crazy how they turned his execution into this huge spectacle. The documentary shows footage of reporters and crowds outside the prison. It's like they were waiting for a rock star.
It's a bizarre contrast, isn't it? On one hand, people are relieved, they want justice. But then there's this undeniable fascination with death, with the macabre.
And Bundy, he knew exactly how to play into that. He gave interviews, confessed to more murders. It's like he wanted to go out with a bang, keep everyone talking about him.
Ultimate narcissist. He craved that attention, even if it was negative attention. Media, unfortunately, they gave him exactly what he wanted.
A reminder to be careful about how we consume this kind of content, But we can't forget, beyond the media circus, Bundy's case changed how law enforcement works.
Definitely. He showed everyone how important communication between agencies is, and his crimes pushed them to develop better ways to profile and track down serial offenders. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit is a direct result of what they learned from Bundy.
Amazing how something so terrible can lead to positive change.
It's a complicated legacy, for sure. But as we wrap up this look at Ted Bundy, it's important to think about what it all means. What stuck with you? What did we learn from his crimes? And how can we use that knowledge to make the world a better, safer place?
Those are big questions. I hope our listeners really take some time to think about them. We've covered a lot, from his childhood to his manipulative tricks, the horrific details of his crimes, and how it all ended. But there's one last thing I think we need to discuss. The media frenzy around his execution and all the ethical questions that come with it. It's just wild to think about how they turned his execution into this massive media event.
Yeah.
Documentary shows all these reporters and crowds outside the prison like it was some kind of, a spectacle. Really unsettling.
It says a lot about us, doesn't it? Our fascination with true crime. I mean, part of it is wanting to see justice done, but there's also that morbid curiosity. Hard to deny it.
Bundy, you got to give him this. He knew how to work the media. The podcast talks about how he was giving interviews, confessing to more murders right up until the end. Like he wanted to have that last word, stay in the spotlight.
Total narcissist. Needed that control, that attention, even if it was, negative. And sadly, the media gave it to him.
A good reminder for all of us to think critically about what we're consuming, right? But putting the media circus aside for a second, Bundy's case really did change the way law enforcement works, especially when it comes to serial killers.
Absolutely. He forced them to get better at communicating between agencies, and his crimes made them develop much more sophisticated ways of profiling and tracking these guys.
The podcast explains how the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, the BAU, that was a direct result of Bundy, and it's made a huge difference.
Yeah, the BAU, they use psychology, crime scene analysis, data, all of it, to try and understand these killers and predict their next move. They've saved so many lives because of what they learned from cases like Bundy's.
Kind of amazing, that something so horrific could lead to something so positive. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep wondering, what's the takeaway here? What do we do with all this information about Bundy, his crimes, the impact he had?
Tough question. There's no easy answer. But I think, for me, Bundy's story shows us that evil can hide in plain sight. It reminds us to be careful, to trust our gut, and to never underestimate how much darkness can be lurking in someone who seems totally normal.
That's scary, but true. We can't be naive about the world, right? But it's not about living in fear. It's about being aware, informed, and taking steps to protect ourselves and the people we love.
Exactly. And I think it's also about remembering the victims. It's so easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of a case like this, but we have to honor the people whose lives were cut short by Bundy. Their stories matter.
You're so right. Their stories, their strength, that's what we should focus on. And it reminds us that even in the face of the worst kind of darkness, there's always hope. There's always the chance for good to win out.
Beautifully said. So, as we close out this deep dive into the life and crimes of Ted Bundy, I hope it's given you more than just chills. I hope it's made you think, made you understand a bit more about the darkness and light in all of us, and maybe even inspired you to help make the world a little bit safer, a little bit kinder.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe out there.